Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. And yes, we are here with another classic movie review. Yes, we haven't done one of these in quite a while. I know we've had some planned, but I mean, we've been so inundated with new horror content that it just makes it hard to sit down and kind of reminisce on some of the classics, some of the ones that we love. But this month, the month of April, we have a bit of an anomaly going on in the horror space, the creature feature space, where we have not one, but two spider horror films. And yes, we've already covered one with Sting, which we have a review out for now. And as we're recording this, is out in theaters. So you guys can go check this bad boy out. I highly recommend you do. Luke and I had a blast with it. And coming up at the end of the month, we have Infested, which looks pretty cool. I'm excited to see what that has to do with it. Also, the director of that is going to be helming the first of what is supposed to be a few Evil Dead spin-offs. So yeah, of course we have to go back and look at some of the great spider films of old. And I mean, there's one that is so near and dear to our hearts. And if you can see the logo above us, you know, and obviously from clicking on the video, we're talking Eight-Legged Freaks. Luke, how do you feel about the fact that we have two big spider movies in theaters right now? And how excited are you to dive into this?
Well, it's certainly unorthodox to have one really spider horror movie come out, let alone two in the same month. Just because it's one of those horror subgenres that it doesn't get a lot of love, and when it does, it's just not really done right. It kind of falls under the radar, and it's just totally forgotten about. So I'm sure there's a handful of spider films out there that we're unaware of that just randomly show up on Tubi or something like that that a lot of people haven't seen just because, a lot of them are just heavily CGI and don't really work. But, you called this a classic review, and I'm going to say there's an emphasis on classic when we're talking Eight-Legged Freaks, at least from our end. Because this film here, I grew up with. It's no secret on the channel that we're huge fans of David Arquette.
Oh,
So
yes.
anytime he is the leading man in any of these films that we're going to show up for, and there isn't I guess a deep catalog of mainstream spider horror. There's about two. So I guess we're covering half the catalog right now up until the end of April, and then we get the other two. But this one is still always so much fun to go back to, and like I said, absolute classic.
100%. And I think we even said it in our review that of Sting, I'm saying here, where that film has kind of also landed itself as probably one of the better spider films that we've gotten in comparison. And I do want to say, preface this with the fact that we do have a little bit of a special addition to this video where Luke and I actually got to sit down with Kiah Roache-Turner, director of Sting, and talk about spider films, his spider film. So in celebration of Sting's release, because it's been out this weekend, and we'd highly encourage you guys to go see it. We're going to be playing some clips of that interview interspersed as we've been doing with our coverage of Eight-Legged Freaks here. So definitely enjoy that. But why don't we hop into Eight-Legged Freaks? Yes, and just like you said, you grew up with this movie. I did too. I vividly remember the first time I saw this. I was in Maryland at my cousin's house. I think my uncle and my dad rented this for me and my cousins at a Blockbuster when they were still around. And yeah, we went back to the house. We were sitting in there on bunk beds. I was on my little blow up air mattress on the floor. We were all transfixed and glued to one of those tiny little VHS television combos that we used to have back in the day, and we were just watching this movie, just completely obsessed. And I'll remember they thought they were so clever, our parents. They went and got like a Halloween spider decoration and opened the door and tried to scare us with it, and we were all just like, what? Like, no, like, we're trying to watch the movie here. Like, that's how like into it we weren't even like freaked out. We were just like, hey, like, what gives? Like, you're interrupting the movie. Like, we're so into it because, like, you gotta remember me. It's no secret I'm a creature feature fan. I always mention it. My cousins were too. We were at the perfect age for this kind of stuff. Giant spiders. It's kind of a zany, wacky story. Dare I say, very, very 80s style story set up here. And honestly, the feeling, the kind of vibe that this entire film radiates, it feels so in line with like the Blob from 1988, in the sense of it being a small town, very Tremors, lots of really big callbacks there. And yeah, I really, really had fun revisiting this film.
Yeah, my first watch was not nearly as ceremonial as yours. I remember this one coming out and them actually playing that trailer on television, and just being captivated by it. Obviously, I was a huge David Arquette fan back then when this had first come out. Me being a professional wrestling fan, I have a love for a film called Ready to Rumble that he's in. And it amplified my love for David Arquette. So this had come out with that kind of funny tone. I was extremely interested in it, but not a going to the theater kind of kid. I waited for this one to come out. I didn't even actually get this one when it came out on DVD. I caught this one actually, I think halfway through. I don't even know if it was on. Maybe it was on USA. So didn't even get the front half of the film, but I just remember when all hell breaks loose and we have the spiders jumping on trucks, really taking over the town, and we're getting to that mall aspect of it. And as
Mhm.
soon as I jumped in, just right there, I mean that's a wild place to jump into the story, because you're just seeing so many captivating visuals, and it is so much fun. That was back then was not as spoiled as we are now with streaming. So it was like I had to wait for this one to come back on whenever USA was going to play it again. And I remember I don't think I did actually see it in its entirety, probably for a couple more weeks, because I had to wait for that turnaround time for it to come back. But this one, like you said, it very reminiscent of an '80s tale. I got initially some Return of the Living Dead Part 2 vibes with the little
Yes.
toxic waste falling off the truck. And I think that's such a smart setup because it's so minimal, but it kind of instantly gives you that nostalgia feel to it. And, I think this one coming out was in 2002. I think was kind of, maybe it was overlooked a little bit. I think if this had come out later on, where this kind of renaissance with horror and kind of wanting that nostalgia for the '80s, I think this would be an even higher regarded film. It would probably be one of those ones a lot of people mention, because yes, people mention Eight-Legged Freaks, but I still think this one flies a little bit more under the radar, just because maybe of that CGI aspect of it. But this one has all the makings of a great setup. You can tell that this one was really studied in terms of hitting those beats that a lot of those iconic '80s films have.
So I'm always having ideas and always putting together mini synopsis and treatment. And my one rule is that if I have an idea, I have to find a producer who's going to back it, and then I will run with it. And so if they can go out and get some development money and whatnot, then I'll do it. I try not to do things on spec these days. But it's good because the market tells me what works and what doesn't. So if I come up with what I think is a great idea, but nobody really bites in terms of going, well, yeah, I'll throw a little bit of money at that, it means the market doesn't want it, and therefore, like, it's probably not a great idea. So kind of the market decides which ideas of mine have wings, and then there's the long process of script development, and you just do draft after draft after draft until suddenly you blink and you're on set with a giant spider made by Richard Taylor.
And I think one of the best things about a lot of these 80s films that we praise so much is that like they were literally the remakes, I should say, were taking like 1950s like concepts or films that were, pretty low budget by 1950s comparisons, and giving them new life, bringing them up here. And that's a lot of how this feels. It feels again like this could have been a 50s movie that was remade in the 80s, and for some reason we're getting it in 2002. And I know some people will probably say that that's sacrilege, but I don't know, man. I feel like all of the pieces fit rewatching this last night. Like it just the setup, like you said, it is so perfect with the toxic waste being dumped into the river and everything and all that. And then you obviously have the scientist, the spider keeper, who's grabbing these crickets, and that's how the spiders get big. It's like that is so 1980s. That is so 1980s creature feature setup.
And I love that aspect of it where it's so, again, minimal, but it would have been screenwriting 101 to say the toxic waste gets on the spiders, but we do
Mhm.
it. It gets on the crickets that the spiders eat, and they just keep growing and growing and growing. And I love that aspect of it because it's just such a small detail, but I think it makes even more sense. And this brings up this kind of leads into one of my favorite ideas of the film, where like you look at arachnophobia, and I believe I haven't watched that one in a little bit of time, but I believe that was all the same species of spider. But like this
Mhm.
one, I think this one opens up because it's a guy who collects spiders, loves spiders, has all these different species. So it's the idea of these crickets are making them bigger. So you have a jumping spider, you have the tarantula, you have all these different species of, we get such a fun scene of these like jumping spiders chasing these guys on motocross bikes through the desert, and it's just so fun because it's such a thrill ride. And as you're saying, it feels like this 50s movie. They pay tribute to it in the film. It's always playing on TV. These, the big ants. I don't know if that was what them
Them.
maybe or
That
something.
was them.
Where and we talk about it on here, where sometimes CGI takes you out of it. Dated CGI takes you out of it. But you look at those films from the 50s, and you have these giant creatures, these giant ants, and you could tell it's fake. It looks fake, but it adds to the charm. And I think adding in an overabundance of CGI to Eight-Legged Freaks adds to that charm. It's almost like harkening back to those 50s of this looks like a fake ant, but I love this film because it's a giant creature feature. It kind of warms your heart. And I think watching Eight-Legged Freaks, I still get that, where the CGI for me doesn't take me out of it. It adds to the charm. It just adds to the elements of this film.
I agree. And, honestly, I'm glad you brought that up because this is one of those films that I said to my wife as I finished watching this, where I just said, this is one of those movies where, like, because she obviously had never seen it. She wasn't too impressed. She's not big on the monster films. But she was like, the spiders look so bad. And I was just like, well, this was 2002. And I'm just sitting here like, it might be nostalgia for me, but the fact that you just brought it up there too, it's like, I honestly don't get so sucked out by the spiders here. It adds to kind of the fun throwback element that this has, where they are, I think in some scenes they look great. I think they actually do hold up pretty well. Some scenes, yes, they do clearly look like CGI spiders, especially the ones that aren't in the spotlight as much. And I will say that some of the shots of the spiders in the jumping spider sequence definitely do kind of really look like that dated CGI. But again, I can let all of that go because I think that this film is so much fun. And like a sequence like that is so much fun. And it's really playing to its strengths of we're not taking this so seriously. It hits on that kind of Tremors aspect of like, we're gonna have a fun time with this, but there's still gonna be freaky moments. You know what I mean? Like it's an adventure horror, and it's one of those things where it's like it makes it such a breeze to sit through, and it does make it forgivable for me.
Yeah, working with puppets is hard, like because you just don't have as many moves. A puppet can only move in so many different ways. The human body can move so quickly and beautifully, but like with a puppet, like it's kind of a bit, so you've really got to be. It's all about planning for every single shot. If you plan and you test, you're going to pull it off. But no, practical to me is the opposite. If it's practical, I know I can do it. I get nervous when it's digital because it's a big question mark because I'm not in control of that. What happens is, fix it in post is a wonderful thing. Maybe if you're Christopher Nolan or Denis Villeneuve, because you've got $100 million, digital budget. I don't have that. And as I shoot, my digital budget always shrinks. So I'm always very nervous about fix it in post because as an independent filmmaker, I know what I can do with people and puppets and smoke and shadows and a lens and a camera. I control that. I don't really control post as much because so much of that it just comes down to budget. And if you're given a bad digital shot and you don't have the money to make it good, you just have to cut it, and then you're left with a hole in a scene.
And it's not as jarring. We've covered Tremors 2 on the podcast that we do, and those scenes where they only had so many of the shriekers, practically, and then they had to use CGI. for that movement, that wild movement that they do. It's like that you wouldn't have really been able to achieve practically. And same thing here with Eight-Legged Freaks, where they had a big idea where to take a practical spider like that and try to achieve what they did with them being on top of cars or crawling on buildings, and it was just not obtainable. So, for me, it's like I think this film, and there's a very, very small category where a couple of films get a pass of dated CGI that adds to the charm of it. And I think Tremors 2 does not take me out of it. I think it doesn't necessarily add to the charm of it, but I see the idea of it, and I think it works. It doesn't take you out of the film, and I think Eight-Legged Freaks is in that category as well, where it kind of amplifies that idea. It kind of does harken back to those older elements, I think. And then just there's no way around it, and you could tell maybe this would be a little more jarring for me if the groundwork wasn't laid, as you had talked about, just
Mhm.
with the town settings. They take advantage of it. They open it up. You're in the bar, you're in the restaurant, you're in the mall, you're sitting with all these different characters. We have our one character that does a radio show in his little trailer. And, you're really opening up this space where you're just not, doubling down on our spider terror. It's like this really feels like an actual town. We're getting to know these characters. And I think that's another aspect for me that makes me love this film even more before we even get to the giant spiders. It's like we already have a sense of these people. We know these inner workings. We have a female sheriff, which we never get. I think it's just also well done. And then this aspect when David Arquette comes in of this, it's a dying town. We all want to sell, and he's the holdup. It's like you
Mhm.
could tell that there was so much foundation set in this film before we even get to the spiders that I'm already on board.
No, I agree. And I do want to kind of dive into this cast for a minute because yeah, I think that the cast itself really does add to the vibrancy of the town, but I agree with you. Again, the Blob was coming to mind, even some of those Silver Bullet vibes, especially the barber shop, because it's like I always think about that scene in Silver Bullet when the barber is giving that guy a shave and they hear the wolves howl, and you're just like, oh my god, yeah, it's like that's it. And, I'm always honestly Silver Bullet lives rent free in my brain all the time. But yeah, dude, like this really does have those vibes. And again, I got to bring it back to the cast here. You mentioned the radio DJ, who was played by Dougie Doug. Honestly, I love his character so much in this. Like he is this conspiracy nut, kind of like you said, having a radio show out in the trailer. But like the best part about this, like when revisiting it, that I totally forgot or like just didn't register was like how when they first get to him and they're trying to explain to him that there's giant spiders, and after he's been spouting off about aliens and all this other stuff the whole movie, and he's just like, what do you think, I'm fucking stupid? Like, what are you talking about? There's spiders. And then he quickly has to get on board, obviously. But like I thought that he was just a good example of just like characters that really fit this world, and like why this does kind of scratch that 80s itch, because that is such an 80s character doing something that's so unique and kind of in a world of its own in a sense, as far as just like what they're doing. And then you have Deputy Pete Willis, who just such a lovable guy. Like I always felt bad for him, you know what I mean? Like it's just one of those things where it's like I'm always looking for him. I loved was it Gladys? Was that David
Yes.
Arquette's? Yeah,
Yep.
wonderful character. Adored her, especially when they have to go into the orb weavers
Ah,
nest down there and rescue her. That was one of those scenes where I say that I think the CG holds up really well because it's lit really well. But also it's just like that is a scene that when I first saw the film always sticks with me, with going in there with all the webs and him having to kind of rip that open and all that, like very, very creepy stuff. But like there's so many great side characters in this film. And then obviously Leon Ripley is somebody as Wade that we've seen him before. He was in obviously things like I think one of the ones for me also growing up was The Patriot. I remember him from that. But like he's somebody who is you will recognize his face in this, and like those are just the side characters. So it's like, and I already have so much nice to say about him. But and then we get the rest of these characters. Luke, get kind of dive into some of our leads here with us.
Well, of course, we have Scarlett Johansson, a very young Scarlett Johansson in
I
here,
was gonna
which
say we do have a Black Widow in this film in more ways than one with her, and I think that's so funny that she goes on to play this iconic character of Black Widow, and she's in Eight-Legged Freaks.
and we talk about this kind of laying the foundation of these characters. The moments between her and her brother as this family unit, for me, it just really works. It's sometimes when you kind of get into this and are not really paying enough attention to the details here, I think it feels a little hollow. But when we're actually at the home and we're seeing these kind of family dynamics work again, with the mother being the sheriff, which again in 2002 I don't think we ever got. And just kind of the idea of David Arquette coming back into town, of being our leading man, holding up the town because he doesn't want to sell. I love his introduction of him being on the bus, sleeping,
Yep.
and we don't know exactly what it felt critters like to me. Again, so many different films we can kind of harken back to, but it's, David Arquette is easily the driving force, especially when this first came out. But there is such a complete cast here of just how well they all work together. And I think you said it best using the term vibrancy, where it just feels alive. It doesn't feel like anything is rushed in the town. It doesn't feel like we don't get enough time with any of the characters. I think they all have their own little side stories with, Scarlett Johansson and the boyfriend, and David Arquette falling in love with the sheriff and her husband cheating on her, all this stuff. Oh, sorry for all the spoilers. Hopefully you've watched it if you're watching the video. But, just all this wild stuff happening. It just feels like each character had their own motivation going into this.
I think the more personal you make a thing, the better it is inherently. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just my family. Like we had just had a baby, me and my wife at the time, and that was pretty stressful. And I put a lot of that stuff in. I am the father of a stepdaughter who I adore, and we have a very, very good relationship. We actually don't really fight that much, so I had to make up a bunch of that crap. But the feelings, the emotions were true, and that relationship is very true. I do go to her for screenwriting advice, believe it or not, and so she's helped me with story. And so their dynamic of her almost being more talented than him in a weird way is probably a thing. She's probably going to she'll grow up to be like a better filmmaker than me. I hope so. Yeah, my father-in-law, who I adore, and who has a great cinema mind and taught me more about film than almost anybody I know, had Alzheimer's a couple of years ago, and that was something that we all had to go through. I love him very much, and to see him go through that was horrible. And I felt like it was okay for me to put that in a film because I'd been through it. Me and my wife had been through it really intensely, and so, yeah, I mean, it's not just, Helga's memory loss isn't really something that I just threw in as a narrative thing, even though it is a handy narrative thing to have. It really does come from a real place. So, I think if anything resonates emotionally with people with this movie, it's because it's based on real things.
You brought up a good point that I was going to say as a major compliment for me. We are constantly criticizing pacing on this show. Dare I say Eight-Legged Freaks has really spot on pacing.
Absolutely.
Again, and I think that it hits that sweet spot of like those 80s movies that I reflect on, because I think The Blob and Silver Bullet are all films that have perfect pacing when it comes to horror and scares, and when it comes to like creatures and monsters. That's what I love, honestly. Like when I'm excited about a creature feature, I almost love the build up to it more than I like seeing the actual creature violence. And that's just because like I grew up watching films like this where you have these characters that aren't just, paper thin throwaway characters. They have depth to them. And I'm not saying they're the deepest characters in the world, but they have depth in the sense of somebody sat there and thought, okay, I'm going to make this guy a radio DJ. I'm going to make this guy kind of our human antagonist who is trying to reopen the minds and make this a whole thing, but David Arquette's kind of butting heads with him. You know what I mean? Like they're giving these things, obviously having a female sheriff whose husband cheated on her. There's so many layers to them, and they don't have to be thought provoking. They don't have to be anything too extreme. They are just right for as far as what this story's trying to do. It's like you gave enough of a shit to write a little bit more than what they, necessarily needed to be. And they're not overwritten either, which I've seen a lot of creature features where people overwrite and they spend way, way too much time and they take away from the fun aspect. This has that perfect balance. This is one of those things again that like I compare it to those. I would even compare this to some of its contemporaries at the time, even saying something like Anaconda or Lake Placid. Those are other movies that I think are really paced well. And I think that it's because, again, you have good characters that are fun and interesting and great monster scenes. So it's like, I really think that Eight-Legged Freaks, of all of those films, really nails that sweet spot for me.
Yeah, it's like you have this looming tension, and I think that's probably the thrill of the ride there, where it's like you're waiting for all this to just really happen, and being able to open up that town and sit with these characters, like we mentioned the blob so many times in here, but you can't escape it. Where they're at the football game, and we have the sheriff sitting at the restaurant, and no one else is there. It's like those again, they're not deep character moments, but they're moments that mean a lot to the audience. And I think you get
Mhm.
that a lot with David Arquette walking through the town, kind of getting reacclimated with everybody and everything with the town sheriff. You have those moments that they're not necessarily overly deep, but you're getting screen time with these characters. So then when we're amping up and these spiders are finally taking over the town and we're in the mall, well, we're getting bombarded with so many action and horror shots that it means so much. It's when our deputy is shooting the spiders and tells the sheriff, he'll find his own way out. He's just covered. It's like one of those things where you feel yourself being like, I hope he finds an exit.
Right?
Because it's like you feel like this is one of those rare films where you want to see so many characters make it out, where it's like sometimes it's like, oh, I just want to see this sole character, our lead, make it out. But this one was like, there's a handful of characters you just want to see make it out of here and um get away from these spiders. And it's once we go down in those mines, I think you brought up the webs in that the den for the orb weavers. I thought that was, again, I love seeing that stuff. You have it in Sting. You've had it in Gremlins too. As soon as you see those spider webs, there's that instant moment of terror. And I think they build that so well. It's like you get that fun actiony feel to it, but then when they lean into those moments of terror, I think it really works. And as we talked to the director of Sting, he said he felt Eight-Legged Freaks was more of a comedy, and it has its comedic moments. Yes, it can fall. It has certain remnants of comedy in there, but it really does lean into the action. It does lean into that terror, and it's just such a pure creature feature for me.
So I knew that if I was going to make a giant spider movie, it'd be good because, like I'm an okay horror filmmaker. I know what I'm doing. I'm a professional. I'll make it good, but I know it's going to be good because I'm terrified of spiders. So whatever it is in a spider that makes it scary, I'm going to be able to communicate that. I watched Arachnophobia when I was a kid, and because I'm arachnophobic, it was like horrifying, but it was well put together, like that's like an Amblin movie, right? So Spielberg was involved. Frank Marshall did like a damn solid job of directing, good cast, John Goodman. Actually, now that I think about it, the John Goodman character I pretty much stole, and instead of John Goodman, I'm using Jermaine Fowler. So that film definitely resonated with me. And again, it's a family thing with a peril that's a spider, kind of in a single location to a degree. So yeah, Arachnophobia was a template. I've never seen Eight-Legged Freaks because I saw it as a comedy, and I'm like, I don't find spiders funny. I am terrified. So I would never make a giant spider comedy. It would have to be scary.
No, I agree. And that does bring us to, I want to discuss for you, and then I'll have you go first and then I'll go. I want to know your favorite set piece of the film, and I want to know what your favorite spider was.
Oh, for me, it's gonna be the webs. It's like when they go into the den, for me, that just absolutely works from a tension perspective for me. I just absolutely love the visuals. Anytime we're dealing with a spider film, that's one of my requirements is we got to have this overabundance of webbing. But one of the other things I got to bring up is that I love the shot of the big tarantula walking through the sea of spiders on the outside, where you're understanding some sort of hierarchy.
Mhm.
I absolutely love that as well. I think that really works. But overall, I got to say it's the jumpers.
I completely agree. There are a lot of great moments. I'm gonna say, I love just every aspect that we spend in the little scientist lab at the beginning. I think
Yeah.
like that's such a great set. It's so well thought out. But for me, the obviously the biggest and best set piece, in my opinion, it's the mall. I think the mall is just so damn fun. It really does epitomize the perfect blend, in my opinion, of the comedy and horror in this film, where it's like it is this over the top set piece, which I know for some people this might be like the most egregious because yeah, I don't think the CGI looks the best in this part, but I'm so sold by that point. Like you mentioned the tarantula, just seeing him walk over these cars and everything, and then you have the orb weavers. We talk about Pete when he has to kind of hold the gate down and he's using the chainsaw to cut off the
I
limbs
was
and
just
stuff.
about to bring like that making usage of your set, like to
So
take
good.
that gate that they actually use in the mall, and then to have the little legs of the spider coming through, and he just with the chainsaw. I absolutely love it, and the way they spray that green goo of the blood out, it just
Yep.
so perfect.
I completely agree. And I mean, honestly, for me, as far as creep factor goes, it's the orb weavers. They are so they feel like the most malicious spiders in the entire film. Like they are the creepiest and the scariest, in my opinion. But then also like the jumpers. I this is something that I've seen people criticize, but for me it worked so well is when the jumpers are making little noises
Oh
as they're kind of like talking to each other in a
yes,
sense.
I
It's so
love it. I
goofy to me.
Yeah,
It
and that's what it
works.
like, yeah, that's what it's like. It's got that goof factor that I absolutely love because it's just like it almost sounds like a video game at
Yeah.
times, and it just like, um again, it has those tones of comedy that really work in here, and I think it is because we're kind of telling this. It's a giant spider story, and it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, you can get some great horror out of it, but at the end of the day, those roots, do leave you open for some comedy elements to it, and I think Eight-Legged Freaks does intertwine the action, the comedy, as well as the horror and the terror. I think it is all such a perfect kind of melting pot of a spider horror film.
I agree. And one of the things that I actually picked up on this time around, and I think Ryan Hollingsworth, he mentioned this in his review of this, because that's one of the ones I watched just to get a sense for how people were feeling, was the idea of this film's not overly violent. There's not like a ton of gore or anything. I would say Sting has more gore than this,
Yeah.
even though Sting's rated R and this is PG-13. But it's one of those things for me where there is a lot said in that opening sequence with the kid and the scientist, and they're talking about the spiders of how they attack and consume their prey. They mention what was it? Was it the trapdoor spider or was it the maybe it was the orb weaver? Whichever one they mentioned that they say that it injects a
Yeah.
like an acidic venom
Yep.
into them, and you see people will get like stung or bit by them. And the thought of just like that happening, even though it's not like overly expressed where it's like they're melting or anything, it does add more creep factor to those kills and those attacks. They look a little dated, especially when you have like a full blown CGI spider in the mall jumping on somebody. It can look a little goofy, but like again, I can forgive it because I'm having so much fun, but also with a little bit of that sprinkled in there on top, it does add that creep factor that I'm kind of looking for from it. And honestly, man, I mean, we've been talking about it for over 30 minutes now, and I know with the interview, this is going to make this video super long, but like, I gotta say, Eight-Legged Freaks for me, as far as a creature feature goes, that's more fun than terror. It's a complete package. I think that if you have not seen Eight-Legged Freaks in, say 10 years, however long it's been, give this a rewatch this month, especially celebrating a film like Sting being in theaters and then Infested coming to Shudder. Like it's Spider Month. Check this thing out. Like that's my full blown opinion on that.
Yeah, if you've seen the trailer on this and haven't watched it and were uncertain how you were going to feel about it, I got to be honest, the script, the story, it's smarter than a lot of people give it credit for. I mean, it's not like the perfect film at all,
It's
but
not
this
Shakespeare.
is
but it's
Yeah,
great.
and it's not meant to be. It's meant to be this giant creature feature. It's giant spiders, and I gotta say, they open up the town beautifully. There's great character work here. Nothing overly in depth. You get just enough time to resonate with these characters to go on this ride with them. There are some really compelling sequences with the jumping spiders, orb weavers. There's a lot of stuff in here that is actually creepy, and it really does work. And when they lean into that over actiony kind of fun aspect with you cutting off spiders' limbs and them bleeding all over, it really does work. It lets you get lost in the story. It lets you go on this ride, and it's worth it by the end of it. And I love the way they do close it. I wish this thing would have had a sequel. If there's one thing I'm asking, Sting does well, Infested does well, and then maybe Shudder, Screenbox, anyone, please, please, let's get David Arquette back. I want to see him on the screen, and I want him to do Eight-Legged Freaks too, because I think bringing him back as this expert that has dealt with these giant spiders, and maybe it's a new town, and maybe they're bringing him in to help out, would just be a perfect counterpart to this. So definitely check this out if you haven't before. If you haven't seen it in a while, dust this thing off. It's worth a watch. Absolutely. It's a fun thrill ride. And please, anyone listening out there, give us a damn sequel, please.
I know. And I was looking at IMDb trivia as we were talking here. There was supposed to be a sequel. There was. It was announced, Dean Devlin, and I believe, let me go back to it here, just to kind of give us an end capper here, so we know that there is at least some ideas, some things were floating around. Maybe we'll have to look into this more, see if we can pull something out. If we find a
script, we'll deep dive into
Oh, for sure. That would be so much fun. But essentially, Dean Devlin, it says here, was saying that there was going to be a sequel. It was announced in 2000. It was supposed to be. It was announced in 2003. It would have Elroy Elksmy, the director, returning, David Arquette reprising his role, but nothing more was said about it. And the script was later announced to have been scrapped for unknown reasons. So I think that means that there could be maybe a version floating around online somewhere. We'll have to kind of look into it, see if maybe somebody who has done a deep dive into this has found it. Because I think, like, as far as unproduced scripts go, I know I'm working hard on some Halloween scripts to follow up on that. But there's a ton of stuff that we want to dive into. Texas Chainsaw. I could easily add Eight-Legged Freaks to that list and really dive into seeing what those ideas would be, and maybe, just maybe, give our pitch on what we might do with this. Because I love this. I love this movie so much. It is so much damn fun. But alrighty, guys, I think we've said enough on this one. And like we said, there's another spider film coming out this month with Infested. So this isn't the only classic spider film we're going to be taking a look at. No, all I will say is, as far as spider films go, yes, Eight-Legged Freaks does exist. It is one of those ones where some people really love it, some people don't know about it, and some people say it's just okay. But there is one spider film that I think is the creme de la creme ultimate spider film. And I'm not going to say it by title, but you should know what it is. And we are going to be talking about it very soon here. So keep an eye out for that. And I guess that's going to wrap us up here. We got a lot of great content on the channel, so keep it here. Check it out. And until next time, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, that ain't no cactus.
Do the horse shit, gonna do it live. Cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna smash your ass.